Nintendo, like most companies, surely has a variety of projects they would like to keep confidential. We know they are working on games, we know they don't want to tell us all the details yet. However, recently, we've gotten some pretty significant information about 3 different games that are currently still secret that Nintendo does not want us to know about. And all 3 are very exciting for very different reasons, and so that's what we're getting into today on AndresRestart. And now here is a brief message about today's sponsor. Snaxy is the ultimate Android gaming mobile app where you can earn incredible rewards from over 100,000 options while playing your favorite mobile games. And it also helps publishers acquire new users. Every gaming session with Snaxy is rewarding, with over 100,000 items like gift cards, game skins, and in-game coins. Integrate Snaxy into your routine for non-stop gaming, personalized recommendations, generous rewards, and frequent content updates. For more on the Snaxy app, check out the link in the description below. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we have a lot to talk about here, so let's get right into it. There are 3 different secret projects that Nintendo does not want us to know about yet. And so let's jump into the first one. The first one has to do with the next game that Masahiro Sakurai is working on. Yesterday, Masahiro Sakurai put out his final video, the finale special on his YouTube channel, Masahiro Sakurai on Creating Games. And it was in this video that some significant revelations were provided. He told us that all of the footage that was recorded for this channel, not counting the finale, was all done 2.5 years ago, in the first half of 2022. And we're having this conversation in late October of 2024. And that fact alone is kind of mind-blowing, and it does have implications for how we've interpreted things that Sakurai has said in the past. But he also told us around July 2021 that he received a request for a game proposal, and he finished it with lightning speed. Now what's interesting about this is that technically Kazuya came out in June of 2021, but he did say about, so around that window of time, and he was also working on Sora, who came out in October of 2021. But essentially, for about a half-year window, Sakurai didn't have much work to do as he had already wrapped up the DLC for Smash Ultimate, and he had to wait for his team to be put together before they can start working on the project in April of 2022. And so that's why Sakurai created the YouTube channel Creating Games to help teach people on creating games, to sort of pay back to the community in some ways. But what we're all curious about is, what is this project that he's teasing? It is confidential, and he said that he received a request. So then what that tells us is that this game is not necessarily something that he was hoping to do. So what that tells us is there's a company that wanted him to make something. And I think that does steer us in a particular direction, which would be Super Smash Bros. And really, that should come as no surprise. Super Smash Bros., there's always a Smash Bros. Entry for every major Nintendo console, now even including handhelds starting with 3DS. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is the 3rd best-selling game on Nintendo Switch, sitting at above 34.5 million copies sold. As of June 30th, 2024, I'm sure this number will continue to climb. This is literally the best-selling fighting game of all time. From a business financial perspective, there's really no reason at all why Nintendo would not want Smash Bros. To be followed up. And it should also be noted, Smash Bros. Technically came out in 2018, almost 6 years ago as of this recording, and the DLC wrapped up 3 years ago at this point, October of 2021. So it's been some time. It's been a longer window than it has been for prior Smash Bros. Games, and we assume when the Smash Bros. Game comes out, it wouldn't even necessarily be next year, potentially 2026. So we're talking about 2 more years before you even see this game released most likely, which makes it an even longer window, and thus more reasonable to expect that there will be a follow-up to Smash Bros. I think this is the most practical, common sense conclusion. However, I believe there's also more to this situation. So going back to Masahiro Sakurai's concept video for Smash Ultimate, there were some very interesting things that were said. Towards the beginning of the video, Sakurai talks about how he finished his Smash Ultimate proposal the same day as the final video for the Smash DLC for Smash for Wii U and 3DS. And this proposal was over 200 pages long. And so what you might find interesting about this is that this contrasts quite blatantly to what we just heard Sakurai describe for this new project, where he finished the proposal with lightning speed. However, there is a similarity. As he was finishing up the DLC for Smash Ultimate, he received a request to make something. And as he was finishing up the DLC for Smash for Wii U and 3DS, he got a request to make Smash Ultimate. And so there's a similarity there, but the effort and time it took into making the proposals appears to be different. But there were other interesting things said by Sakurai during this concept video. In this video, Sakurai acknowledged the development challenge of having enough space for Smash Ultimate on the Switch cartridge. And they were able to fit the space for Smash for Wii U and 3DS, but Smash Ultimate was going to be an even bigger game with a whole bunch of music and other things. He even considered having the music be available as a free DLC update. Something not too different from how we've seen a lot of third-party companies address these space issues for Switch games, where there is a day one download to actually have the entire game. But fortunately, he mentions the magic of compression technology, which became significantly more efficient, which allowed them to fit the massive Smash Ultimate onto the Switch cartridge. But immediately after making this point, he also discussed how it would be essentially impossible to make something like a Subspace Emissary, the expansive adventure mode from Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which fans have been hoping to see a return of some kind, but we haven't gotten it. However, he also talked about wanting to make some sort of adequate single-player mode, which ended up being the World of Light. But in hindsight, as a fan, and I'm sure many other fans would agree, the World of Light was probably the worst part of Smash Ultimate. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's definitely nothing nearly as cool as a Subspace Emissary. And so I find this point interesting, because the overall sentiment with Smash Ultimate is that it's the ultimate Smash Bros. Game. Everything about it is totally maxed out. The stages, the music, the characters, the polish, it's all there. But the one thing that's missing is a single player, and this is something that Sakurai acknowledges, to some extent. And so I bring this up because I do feel like with the next Smash Bros. Entry, they are going to want to have a proper single-player experience, something they weren't able to quite accomplish beforehand. But I think we have another clue about what's going on with Smash Bros. From this same concept video toward the end. Sakurai talks about how he's not even sure on the future of Smash Bros. He doesn't make any guarantees about what's happening next. And he also talks about how it would be difficult to increase the magnitude of Smash Bros. After Ultimate. However, he also acknowledges that every time he talks about thinking that the next Smash Bros. Entry would be something impossible, and yet it still happens, and then right after he reiterates again, but it still would be difficult. And so Sakurai himself acknowledges that every time he talks about a project being difficult, somehow it still ends up happening later down the road. So I wouldn't put it past Sakurai to make another Smash Bros. Game. It's gonna happen. But I think the question is, what is his level of involvement? And I think there is reason to believe, from the information we've covered so far, that the next Smash Bros. Isn't quite going to be a full-on direct sequel to Smash Ultimate, but rather maybe something more like a deluxe or an expansion. He received a request from a company, very similar to how things worked out as he was ending the DLC for Smash for Wii U and 3DS. This company seemed aware that he was wrapping things up. And you might say, but hold up, he had to wait for a team to be put together, and so there's no way this could be Smash Brothers. except the team that was working on the Smash DLC was not the exact same team. It was a smaller team because you don't need as expansive of a team. So perhaps in order to actually get everything put together, they need to wait to assemble the correct team for a full-scale project like the next Smash Bros. Even if that next Smash Bros isn't quite a full-on new game, but rather something that's building on Smash Ultimate, and perhaps even including a significant single-player mode. I think this is possible. But it's also possible this request is for something else. While I think it's unlikely, I think it could be for something else. Some people might suggest, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be a Nintendo game, and this is true. However, Sakurai in general loves working with Nintendo, and the fact that the request came in around the time he was wrapping up DLC, I do kind of wonder if it was Nintendo who would have been aware he was wrapping up DLC to now put in the next request the same way they've done in the past. Of course, maybe Sakurai simply accepted this request by this point in time because he was wrapping things up, and so it wasn't necessarily because it was Nintendo. Now, an interesting point that was made by Nintendo Forecast in his own video on this subject of what Sakurai may be working on is that if this was, say, something being made by PlayStation, if Sony is a company who approached Sakurai on this, then we likely would have heard about it already. Nintendo likes to keep their cards closer to the chest for longer than companies like Sony and Microsoft. These types of projects tend to get out a lot sooner, even if they're still a ways off. And I'm inclined to agree with this. I think that if this was being made by another company, there's a pretty good chance we would have heard about it already, since it would have been in development since April of 2022. So at this point, this game's been worked on for 2.5 years, and we haven't heard about it yet. So I would say our best bet is that this is still a Nintendo-related project. And I would also say that if it isn't Smash Bros, I still think Sakurai is likely working on Smash Bros. Who's to say he can't work on more than one project at once, especially if this project isn't necessarily a full-on new Smash Bros game, but really more like a Smash Bros Deluxe with some new content to make it more modernized for the next era of Nintendo. He could have more of an overseeing role there and train up his protege or successor to make the future Smash Bros games. He is considering retirement, so at some point this transition is going to need to happen. And if that's the case, he would have time to work on something else in tandem. Which leads me to believe that there is a solid possibility that what Sakurai is working on is a new entry in the Kid Icarus series. Now, I recognize that most will likely disagree with this premise, but hear me out here. If we go back to March 21st of 2021, Sakurai tweeted this out. I'm reading a Google translation. Today in 2012, Kid Icarus Uprising will be released. There are a lot of people who want a sequel or remake, but that's probably going to be difficult. Pit's new design is a spin-off of the one he created for Smash Bros. Brawl. So here he's celebrating Kid Icarus Uprising, a game he made back on Nintendo 3DS. And I would just like to point out he talks about how making a sequel or a remake would probably be difficult. Something that Sakurai likes to say a lot about his projects, yet still somehow tends to get them done eventually anyways. Of course, perhaps Sakurai simply said this because he doesn't want people to think for sure he's making it, and maybe that's why he says these things in general, suggesting making projects would be difficult, because he doesn't want to promise anything until it's actually happened. And that's a totally reasonable interpretation. But there's more. On November 23rd, 2022, Sakurai released The Fiend's Cauldron. This is a video talking about a feature from Kid Icarus Uprising. And in this video, Sakurai talks about the Fiend's Cauldron, a feature of Kid Icarus Uprising that was essentially a difficulty scale. And he talks about how he wishes he could have done a little bit more with this because he believes that the game wasn't the best suited for beginners. And towards the end of this video, Sakurai says, "It sure would be nice to play Kid Icarus Uprising on a home console. I wonder if someone out there will ever port it." So this is the second time that Sakurai talks about Kid Icarus being made for something outside of the Nintendo 3DS. But now moving on to the third time Sakurai talks about Kid Icarus here. On July 4th, 2023, he released another video. This is a game concept video about Kid Icarus Uprising. And in this video, he talks about how there were some issues with development, how he had a desire to have playable twin sticks with the 3DS peripheral, but that required more processing power, so it was not feasible. And then towards the end of the video, he says this: "It's a shame that it's only lived on 3DS, as I'd love to play on a bigger screen with smoother graphics. But without a team around to work on it, crafting a follow-up seems difficult." So here again, we hear Sakurai talking about wanting Kid Icarus for the third time on another platform outside of 3DS, and again he mentions how this is a project that seems difficult. We've already discussed how even Sakurai himself has acknowledged that he has a history of talking about projects being difficult, but then eventually still making them anyways. He also uses the word seems, which intentionally offers some level of flexibility to what may be going on here. And this is also another time where Sakurai's talking about things he wishes were different about Kid Icarus Uprising that he wishes could have been better. So what's my interpretation of all this? I think there's a possibility, at least, that Kid Icarus Uprising is going to see some sort of remaster or remake. Now I will acknowledge that we recently got news that Bandai Namco cancelled or postponed some sort of Nintendo commission project, which might have been Kid Icarus Uprising. It's possible. But also, I don't think we should focus too much on assuming it had to have been this one project, because Bandai Namco is making so many different Nintendo projects, and if Nintendo themselves commissioned it, then that means they want to invest money in this project, and it could potentially be commissioned elsewhere. I would assume there'd be some kind of refund or something. So I wouldn't totally give up on a Kid Icarus Uprising remake or remaster, even if that canceled project is that. It could have been something else. It could have been something small. We hear about game pitches all the time that only end up going to development for about a few weeks or a few months before they're canceled. So I wouldn't assume that Kid Icarus is the one that was canceled. But something else to note here. We're talking about a remaster or a remake, but Sakurai's working on a new project. But he's also mentioned the idea of a follow-up or sequel. So what if what Sakurai's been doing, trying to advertise it a little bit, he loves this series, but is also working on something. When he recorded these videos, he already knew what he was working on. So there may be some hints here. And I think it's also worth mentioning that because we didn't know that all these videos were recorded around the same time, when we got these two different Kid Icarus related videos, where they were several months apart, there was an interpretation that since, again, he said it's difficult to find someone to make Kid Icarus, that perhaps the first time that Sakurai said this on his channel, he was hoping to put it out there, and maybe this would garner enough interest that perhaps they would put the project together. And then so when we saw him talk about it again several months later and it didn't seem like anything had changed, we assumed that he was still campaigning for the project to happen. But now in hindsight, knowing that all of these videos were recorded around the same period of time, that interpretation seems off. It looks more like he just wanted to talk about Kid Icarus for whatever reason throughout the course of this channel. So if you ask me, I definitely think Sakurai is pushing for something Kid Icarus to happen. I think at least we're getting a remaster or remake down the road, and I wouldn't be surprised if the new project is a sequel. At the same time though, what's most likely is that something Smash related is in the works and Sakurai is absolutely working on that, but it's possible that it might just be in a more of an overseeing role as he works on something else at the same time, which might be Kid Icarus. And I have one more point, although admittedly it's definitely a stretch, but I think it's at least slightly remotely possible, even though it's unlikely. When Sakurai mentioned doing a lightning fast proposal, it was shown with a golden light. For a moment I thought, could this be referencing Kid Icarus? Not just because of the golden light, like with goddess powers and angelic stuff, but also because of the usage of words, lightning fast, which reminded me of the Lightning Chariot, a very important item, plot point, and just overall chapter in the game. The Lightning Chariot goes super fast, it's described as super fast, so it might have been an extremely subtle reference, but probably not. Some have suggested that it could be Kirby, which might be kind of nice to return to before he retires, but the Kirby team just put together Forgotten Land, the best-selling, highest-reviewed Kirby game like ever. It's the best Kirby game. I don't think they need Sakurai to come back in here, so I think that's unlikely. Could it be something else? Totally. But what might that be? He did a great job with Kid Icarus Uprising, which has the same gameplay style as Star Fox. Could Sakurai perhaps be making a new Star Fox? I think he would do a great job, but that's just another one of many possibilities. Now, up to this point in the video, we've only discussed one of the potential secret games, even though this potential secret game might actually be two potential secret games. There is more to discuss here. So if you've gotten to this point and you have been enjoying my content, first I'd like to say thank you for watching all this time, but also to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Now recently we've gotten more information from the huge big Pokemon Terra leak. And the latest leak is another game project by the codename of Rodeo. And I won't be including footage because it's all been blocked out and this video would likely be taken down. However, I'll try and put some sort of imagery to explain what I'm talking about here. This is a game where you ride Pokemon, and we've seen 4 different ride Pokemon: Garchomp, Decidueye, Electivire, and Samurott. And you literally ride on top of them. Garchomp seems to be the main one that's being showcased, and there's literally a girl riding on top of the Garchomp's head. But the Garchomp can still move around and fight, and you can still send out smaller Pokemon from your Pokeball and attack, and I think also catch as well. Apparently this game was supposed to come to both Nintendo Switch and mobile, however the status of it is currently unknown. So it isn't necessarily cancelled, but we don't know what the current plan is for this project. Now something that is also mentioned is that there is a Splatoon inspiration for this game, which is extremely interesting because there is another codename project that Game Freak is working on that's called Synapse. And this game has also been talked about being a multiplayer action game that has a Splatoon inspiration. So the speculation has been that these two games are one the same, and that Project Rodeo, the reason why the status is unknown, is that it transitioned over to becoming Project Synapse. So there is a shift in development here, and from what we've heard of Project Synapse, it is a collaborative effort between both Game Freak and ILCA. Now, what's interesting about this is that, okay, cool, we could have another really interesting multiplayer Pokemon game. From what we've seen in the footage, even though I can't show it here, it does look pretty cool. But also, since we've heard it's supposed to be for both Switch and mobile, it kind of calls us back to Pokemon Unite, a free-to-play game that came out for both, and it actually was pretty well received. I personally enjoyed that game a lot without having to invest a single dollar. I put in a variety of hours, and it was a really good package. Of course, if you wanted to invest some money, the costumes and accessories were pretty cool. And actually looking at Pokemon Unite, the way the accessories and the costumes worked looked to be similar to how it's being described, how it would work here in Project Rodeo, because you would be able to dress up your character and your Pokemon as well. But yes, Pokemon Company has been taking down footage of this. It cannot be shown. They do not want us to know about this secret project yet. But this seems to be an exciting project that I wouldn't be surprised we hear about going into next year. Perhaps it takes longer, we don't necessarily have a timetable, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that they are saving for the beginning of the Switch 2 era. It's been talked about as being made as a Switch game, but through backwards compatibility, it would still be pretty relevant on the console, and they probably want their most hype releases to be coming out around this period of time. But there is another secret project that Nintendo does not want us to know about that is essentially the worst kept secret ever, and that is the game that Nintendo is working on or testing with the playtest program. We've already seen screenshots, we've already seen them talk about it because Nintendo has told their 10,000 playtesters, but they don't want them to talk about it, so every time someone talks about it, they take it down. I literally made a video earlier this week where I talked about this information, but I blurred all the footage significantly, and yet they still took it down after it was out for about 11 hours. Nintendo's trying really hard to not let people talk about this, and it's very interesting because I think back to the art book leak, and videos were made about that. I made a video about that where all the footage was blurred. That video was never taken down. So it's just interesting the level of effort that Nintendo's putting into keeping this project a secret, even though they themselves are literally telling 10,000 fans about what this project is. And what this project is extremely interesting. Here I'll read out this information provided by Oatmeal Dome on Twitter. The playtest software is a new game where you work with others to fully develop a massive expansive planet by utilizing creativity and farmed resources. Notice how that's in quotes, that's in the words of Nintendo. This is an MMO with an expansive planet, so it's seemingly also open world, and it is a communal game where you work with others and you obtain resources, you combat with enemies, and you build these environments that have these beacons. They all look like these blocks that you can stack together. There's a little bit of a Minecraft vibe. There's even a development room, and in there we've seen where it looks like the characters can spawn out of. They're dressed like the Flintstones or cavemen with these light-like electrical-looking tails. So they're like cavemen / monkeys maybe. And so this is an extremely interesting project, not for just this game itself and how it may be increasing the value for expansion pack members down the road, but also how Nintendo is testing out mass multiplayer functionality. I think this will be an actual game we all get to play eventually, but I also think it's them working on just multiplayer games in general. If you think about all the projects we've talked about in this video, Project Rodeo, that would be an online Pokemon game, or Project Synapse, whatever it actually is. A Kid Icarus game, well, Kid Icarus Uprising actually had a significant online multiplayer, but it would be a lot better with online servers. And Smash Brothers, well, has a terrible history of not having good online. It would be nice to finally have good online for Smash Brothers, which for that reason alone, I think they should absolutely make a new Smash Bros. Soon, with a better online setup on Switch 2. And even going beyond that, what if Nintendo wants to have more expansive multiplayer online experiences? What if Monolith Soft is working on something that's MMO-like, or a significant online multiplayer game that's essentially like a giant open world adventure, except your party, it's not just you controlling it, it's you and your friends. You can form a whole party and explore a very Xenoblade-like world. Or perhaps they want to take Splatoon to an even higher level. It's not just 8 players, perhaps it's 16, 32, 64, or even beyond that. Something that's Battle Royale levels of significant multiplayer. This playtest program has all these different levels of implications, which I think is highly interesting. And oh, one more thing I'll point out, this is being made by EPD4. This is the studio that's responsible for things like Brain Age, Miitopia, Game Builder Garage, Nintendo Labo, the recent Nintendo Alarmo, and the NES World Championship editions. This is a team that makes a lot of the innovative, weird, quirky projects that we see from Nintendo. And I expect that we will see this game come out, and I don't think it'll be too long. Eventually Nintendo will stop trying to keep this game a secret to the world. But that's all I have to say on these 3 or 4 secret Nintendo projects that Nintendo doesn't want us to know about. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.